When the alarm went off at the chemical plant, most people would have called 911 and waited. But the night watchman moved different, tactical, precise, like he'd done this before. The young supervisor who followed him couldn't understand why an old security guard moved like special forces, until he saw what was hidden behind the uniform. Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we begin this powerful story of hidden service and quiet heroism, tell me in the comments from which city are you watching this video today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those who never stopped serving. The Meridian chemical plant sat on the edge of town like a sleeping giant. 12 buildings, 3 shifts and one man who walked the perimeter every night from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. His name was Frank Morrison, and for the past 8 years, he'd been the most reliable employee they'd ever had. Frank wasn't much to look at. 62 years old, graying hair always tucked under a blue security cap, and a slight limp that he never explained. He wore the same uniform every night, pressed but faded, with a brass nameplate that simply read, F. Morrison Security. No rank, no decorations, just a man doing his job. The day shift workers barely knew him. They'd see him sometimes in the parking lot as they arrived, thermos in hand, walking slowly toward his beat-up Ford pickup. He'd nod politely, maybe mention the weather, then disappear until the next evening. The night crew respected him because he was thorough, quiet, and never caused problems. Frank had his routine down to a science. First round at 10:30, checking every door and window on buildings A through F. Second round at midnight, focusing on the chemical storage areas. Third round at 2 a.m., when most trouble happened if it was going to happen at all. He carried an old flashlight, a radio that had seen better days, and a clipboard where he documented everything in careful handwriting. What people didn't notice was how he moved. Frank didn't just walk his rounds, he patrolled them. His eyes constantly scanned not just for open doors or broken windows, but for sight lines, cover positions, and potential threat approaches. He positioned himself at corners before turning them, kept his back to walls when possible, and always knew exactly where every exit was located. The new supervisor, Marcus Chen, had started noticing these details during his first week. Marcus was 28, fresh from his army stint in Afghanistan, and something about Frank's movement patterns felt familiar, military familiar. It was a Tuesday night in October when everything changed. Marcus was finishing up some paperwork in Building C when the security alarm screamed through the complex. Not the fire alarm, the perimeter breach alarm. Someone or something had triggered the motion sensors near the chemical storage facility in Building F. Standard protocol was clear. Call the police, wait for backup, don't approach alone. But when Marcus grabbed his radio to coordinate with Frank, he heard something that made him freeze. Frank's voice came through calm, controlled, using terms that weren't in any security manual. Control, this is Watchman. I have eyes on Building F northeast corner. 2 figures moving tactical, initiating silent approach from the south. Do not send backup until I assess the threat level. Marcus stared at his radio. Silent approach. Assess threat level. Those weren't security guard phrases. Those were military tactical communications. Against every regulation in the book, Marcus grabbed his flashlight and headed toward Building F. He moved carefully, using the shadows between buildings, guided by an instinct he'd developed in Kandahar. As he got closer, he could see 2 figures near the storage facility's loading dock, working on the electronic lock with some kind of device. That's when he saw Frank. Frank Morrison moved like a ghost. Marcus watched from behind a concrete barrier as the old security guard approached the intruders using textbook tactical movement. Low profile, maximum cover, precise positioning. This wasn't luck or instinct. This was training. Deep professional, military-grade training. Frank got within 15 feet of the intruders before they even knew he was there. When he spoke, his voice carried an authority that Marcus had only heard from senior NCOs and special operations commanders. Gentlemen, you need to step away from that door and put your hands where I can see them. The 2 men spun around, surprised. One of them, tall and nervous, started to run. He made it exactly 3 steps before Frank moved. Marcus blinked and almost missed it. Frank closed the distance in seconds, took the runner down with a textbook takedown that would have made his drill instructors proud, and had him restrained before the second intruder could even process what had happened. The second man reached for something in his jacket. Frank's voice cut through the night like steel. Don't even think about it. Keep your hands visible and get on your knees now. The authority in that command was absolute. The man complied immediately. Frank had both intruders secured and was radioing for police backup within 90 seconds of first contact. His breathing wasn't even elevated. Marcus watched him check the suspects for weapons, secure the area, and document the scene with the kind of calm efficiency that only came from doing this kind of thing many times before. When the police arrived 12 minutes later, they found a perfectly executed citizen's arrest, complete with evidence preservation and detailed incident reporting. The lead detective, a 20-year veteran, shook Frank's hand and said, "Outstanding work. You've done this before, haven't you?" Frank just shrugged. "You pick things up over the years." After the police left and the excitement died down, Marcus found Frank sitting in the security office, filling out paperwork with the same careful handwriting he used for his nightly rounds. His uniform wasn't even wrinkled. "Frank," Marcus said, settling into the chair across from him, "we need to talk." Frank looked up, his eyes calm but guarded. "About what?" "About how a night watchman moves like special forces. About how you took down 2 armed intruders like it was a training exercise. About how you commanded that situation like a senior operator." Frank set down his pen and studied Marcus for a long moment. "You were in the army. Afghanistan. 3 tours. 82nd Airborne." Marcus leaned forward. "And I know tactical movement when I see it. That wasn't security guard training, Frank. That was something else entirely." Frank was quiet for almost a full minute, the only sound the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Finally, he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small worn photograph. He placed it on the desk between them. The photo showed 8 men in desert camouflage, standing in front of a helicopter. They were dusty, armed, and had the hard look of men who'd seen serious combat. The man in the center, younger but unmistakably Frank, wore the distinctive tan beret of the Army Rangers, 75th Ranger Regiment. Frank said quietly, 1979 to 1999, 20 years. Marcus stared at the photograph. "Rangers lead the way. All the way." Frank completed the motto automatically. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" Frank picked up the photograph and looked at it for a moment before putting it back in the drawer. Because it was a different life. That Frank Morrison served his country and came home. This Frank Morrison just wants to keep a chemical plant safe so people can sleep easy at night. Marcus shook his head. "But the skills, the training, you could have done anything. Private security, consulting, training. I did enough of that for 20 years, Frank said. "Sometimes a man just wants to walk quiet rounds and make sure the doors are locked. Sometimes that's enough." Chapter 5. The respect word spread through the plant over the next few days, but not in the way Marcus expected. There were no newspaper interviews, no corporate recognition ceremonies, no requests for Frank to tell war stories in the break room. Instead, something quieter but more meaningful happened. The day shift workers started nodding with a little more respect when they saw Frank in the parking lot. The night crew listened more carefully when he gave safety briefings. The plant manager quietly increased his security budget and made sure Frank had better equipment. Marcus found himself staying late some nights, walking rounds with Frank when he could. They didn't talk much about the military. Frank wasn't one for war stories, but they talked about other things. Family, the job, what it meant to serve something bigger than yourself. "You know," Marcus said one night as they finished the midnight round, "my unit in Afghanistan worked with Rangers a few times. You guys were legends." Frank stopped walking and looked at him seriously. "We weren't legends, Marcus. We were just soldiers doing our job. The legend part gets added later by people who weren't there. But you were special forces, elite." Frank resumed walking, his voice thoughtful. "Elite means you trained harder so you could do the hard jobs when they needed doing. It doesn't mean you're better than anyone else. It just means you're ready when ready matters." They walked in comfortable silence for a while before Frank spoke again. "You want to know the truth about being a ranger? The real truth?" Marcus nodded. "The hardest part isn't the missions or the combat or the training. The hardest part is coming home and figuring out how to serve when nobody's shooting at you anymore. How to take everything you learned about protecting people and find a way to keep doing it in a world that's moved on." Frank gestured toward the quiet plant around them. "This place employs 300 people. Their families depend on them coming home safe every day. The chemicals we store here could hurt a lot of people if they got into the wrong hands. So I walk these rounds, and I make sure that doesn't happen. It's not flashy, but it matters." Marcus understood then. Frank Morrison hadn't stopped being a ranger when he hung up his uniform. He'd just found a different way to serve. 6 months after the break-in, the Meridian chemical plant was selected for a safety award by the State Industrial Commission. The citation mentioned their excellent security protocols and the outstanding performance of their night security team during a recent incident. Frank was invited to the ceremony. He declined politely, saying he had to work that night, but Marcus went, and when they called his name as the supervisor who had assisted in the apprehension, he stood up and said something that nobody expected. "I appreciate this recognition, but I wasn't the hero that night. The real hero is a man who's been protecting this facility for 8 years, who handled a dangerous situation with the kind of skill and courage that only comes from a lifetime of service. His name is Frank Morrison, and he's everything a ranger should be. Still serving, still protecting, still leading by example even when nobody's watching." The applause was polite but confused. Most people in the audience had no idea who Frank Morrison was, but Marcus wasn't done. "Frank taught me something important about service. It's not about the uniform or the rank or the recognition. It's about finding a way to keep protecting people, no matter what form that protection takes. Whether it's in a combat zone or walking night rounds at a chemical plant, a true warrior never really stops serving." After the ceremony, Marcus drove straight to the plant. He found Frank starting his first round, Same routine, same quiet professionalism. He told him about the speech, about the award, about what he'd said. Frank listened without comment, then said, "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did. People should know that heroes aren't always wearing medals or standing on podiums. Sometimes they're walking night shifts and keeping watch while everyone else sleeps." Frank considered this, then nodded slowly. "Just don't make a big thing out of it, okay? I've got rounds to walk." They shook hands, and Marcus headed home. Behind him, Frank Morrison continued his patrol, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, protecting people who would never know his story, serving in the way that felt right to him. Frank Morrison is still walking those rounds tonight, still checking doors, still scanning for threats, still carrying the quiet authority of a man who learned long ago that true service doesn't need recognition, it just needs to be done right. The young supervisor who recognized him has been promoted twice since that October night. He tells people he learned more about leadership from a night watchman than he did from 3 tours in Afghanistan. The plant hasn't had a single security incident since Frank started working there 8 years ago. The insurance company calls it statistically remarkable. The employees just call it Frank doing his job, because sometimes the most important missions are the ones nobody hears about. Sometimes the most elite soldiers are the ones who learned how to keep serving without the uniform, and sometimes the greatest act of heroism is simply showing up every night, walking your rounds and making sure everyone gets home safe. Frank Morrison never asked for recognition, never needed applause, never required thanks. He just needed to know that the job was done right, and that the people under his protection could sleep soundly because someone was keeping watch. That's what Rangers do. They lead the way, they complete the mission, and they never leave anyone behind. Even if the mission is a quiet night shift at a chemical plant, and the people they're protecting don't even know they need protecting. So I ask you, have you ever met someone like Frank Morrison? Someone whose true service was hidden behind a humble job? Someone whose real heroism was in the daily commitment to keeping others safe? Share their story in the comments. Tell us how they served without recognition, how they protected without praise. Because here at the Human Stories, we believe that the most powerful warriors aren't always the ones making headlines. Sometimes they're the ones walking night rounds, checking doors, and making sure the world is a little bit safer when morning comes. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it with others. Help us honor the quiet guardians who never stopped serving, even after they came home. We'll see you in the next story. And until then, if you ever see a security guard or night watchman who moves with a little too much precision, who carries himself with quiet authority, who seems to know exactly what he's doing even when no one is watching, take a second look. You might be in the presence of someone who once wore a different uniform, in service to the same mission, keeping people safe. Rangers lead the way. All the way, even when nobody knows they're leading.